You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children and old people of all ages. It's Matt, and we are here. Ask a Guide number 28, Eric? 27. 26?
It's 27.
It's what?
It's 27.
It's 27. Ask a Guide number...
Wait, is it?
No, I don't know. This is why I'm asking you.
Oh, God.
Veronica, do you know? All right. I should have looked this up before.
Producer.
Why do I never know?
27.
I never know what number it is. I should number the show notes.
We're losing track. I mean, there's so many of them.
Yes. So many. Okay, but whatever it is, ladies and gentlemen, it's written in the title of the show. What is it? 27? 27?
27.
I was right? I was right. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Chris Army was 26. That's right.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so welcome back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are doing well. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Couple things we want to go over here before we get going. We're talking about General John B. Gordon today. Jim Pangburn is our guest. Before we get along to everything, I have some, just some little updates and housekeeping things to go over with you right now. So let's do that. First of all, we got a couple more gifts off of our Amazon wish list here. We got a webcam stand from Edward Fagan Jr. Thank you very much for that, Ed. He says, enjoy your gift. And let's see, we've got, he also says, hey, Matt, sorry for the confusion. Threw in another item. Best of luck with the studio. What was the other item? Darn it. What came with the webcam? Something else came with the webcam. Oh,
I don't know. I don't receive the packages.
I know. Sorry, Ed. But I did get two things with the webcam. I thank you for that. And, mic stand extension. That's what it was. Yes, and I'm using it right now. There we go. Okay. Also, thanks to John C. from Connecticut for the Amazon gift card that he sent us. That went to buy a few things, small things, for the studio here. And that was that there. So thank you all for doing that. We got a lot of Patreon and free feed shows coming up. We have a very, very busy week this week, Eric, and I blame you.
We are incredibly busy.
Yes. Today starts 3 days of nonstop recording.
Today's the easy day.
Today is the easy day. Tomorrow we have two shows.
It starts at noon tomorrow, and we're going to be busy until probably 7, 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah. And then Thursday is another two-shower.
Thursday, yep.
Just to give you guys an idea, Daryl Rivers, the show with Daryl Rivers, Lord Rivers on Instagram, just came out on Patreon yesterday, and people are really liking it. He's a very interesting guy. That's over at Patreon.
Was fun to have on.
Yeah. This week we're recording with Matt Borders, Pete Herman. Matt Borders is going to be doing the Christmas music extravaganza.
Yep. There will be singing and dancing. You won't be able to see it because we're audio only.
Yeah. But
there will be
it's
dancing,
music.
Probably.
Oh, well, of course there's going to be dancing because Matt is quite a songstress. And I am particularly looking forward to his finale, which is when he dons a Speedo and sings It's a Marshmallow World. So that'll be good. Pete Herman is going to be on, maybe with Chris Army on Wednesday, correct?
Maybe not. I haven't heard.
And Louis Trott and Mary Turkmena are going to come on to talk about the Committee on the Conduct of the War.
Yep, that'll be Thursday morning.
And then we've got Rick Schaus, one of the authors of Lee is Trapped and Must Be Taken, coming
Thursday
on that
afternoon.
same day. Also, we're just waiting for dates, but a big one that we got, thanks to our buddy Steve Fan, is Noah Andre Trudeau, author of Gettysburg, A Testing of Courage, which is one of my favorite Gettysburg books. Of course, a Addressing Gettysburg favorite, Scott Hartwig, is going to come on again. And we're talking about the the Copse Trees high water mark.
Yeah, and John Batchelder's involvement in the remembrance of the high water mark.
That's right. And also at the end of the month, we're going to be recording with Chris Army about Willard's Brigade, or the Harper's Ferry Cowards. Yeah. So we got a lot of stuff going on this month. A lot of that stuff is for the free feed, and well, actually, most of that stuff is for Patreon, but some of that stuff is for the free feed.
Yeah, it's about 50-50. There's 3 Ask A guides for sure.
Yeah, and so yeah, those will be over at Patreon there, available over at Patreon there, and we're gonna have a new $25 tier after the new year, which is going to include live video and things like that. I found out that it's a lot easier to do through Patreon than I thought. Patreon kind of links with YouTube, and you can do these live videos for specific tiers, and so that's what we're going to do
fun.
there.
Very exciting.
Yep. And what else? Let's see. Oh, yeah. Another thing after the new year that we're coming closer to having is a new website. Which will include an ability for you to go and book a tour with any of the guides that come on the show who wish to participate in that.
Yep.
We're not putting together tours. We're just simply a conduit between you and the guides who work with us.
Yep.
A lot of people, I always say, just send us an email and I'll set you up with the guides.
That's not the easiest system to work with, I've found.
It's not. No, I've found it too, because they email me and I got to make sure it happens. And now there's more of them coming in.
It'll be a whole lot easier because the guides can tell us when they're available. It can go on the schedule, and you can go onto the schedule and sign up.
Boom, there you go.
Yeah.
So
takes out the middleman.
Yeah, exactly. And cutting out the middleman is the way to go. What?
With keeping the middleman.
Oh, exactly. So that is going to be one of the things there too. And also, people always ask, when is the Today Show going to air? When is the Today Show going to air? And I keep saying, I don't know.
Sometime.
They don't update you. Well, just before the show, I got an update.
Oh.
Today's Show update. It will air in January sometime.
Oh.
Okay. Dina, our friend who put it all together, she finally emailed the producers.
Okay.
And she said, hey, what's going on? What the heck? And they said, in response to that, let's see, what did she say here? She said, here's what the producer said. He said, hi. So why do people start off with so? Anyway, hi. So most of our programming for the rest of the year has been booked. It's a lot of holiday, etc. But they love this story for January. We will keep you updated every step of the way. I thank you for your understanding and happy holidays. So
fair enough.
It will be in January when everything's boring anyway and you need a little something exciting. And also it's the dead of winter and you'll get to see sunny skies and colorful leaves from our segment because we shot it in October.
We surely did.
So there we go. Okay, moving right along. Today we're talking about John B. Gordon. Contrary to popular belief, it is not the inspiration for the Chuck Berry song Johnny Be Good, unless you know something to the contrary, right, Jim? Okay, good. I believe that was actually Johnny Johnson, his piano player, who was the inspiration for that. But anyway, Jim Pangburn is with us. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Matt. Good to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you. It's your first time in our new studio. You were just raving about the beauty, the splendor.
It's impressive.
Yeah, at least our side of it, right? Then there's the bike side, which is kind of a mess. But our side is a mess, too. It's a small space, but, whatever.
No,
it is what it is.
It seems like a real studio.
Yeah, seems like, and that's the key word. Seems like a real studio. But where are we here? So we're talking about John Gordon, Confederate general. Why don't you give us a little bit of a bio on the man? He didn't just sprout out of the ground on July 1st, 1863, and go back into the ground on July 3rd. There was a life before and there was a life after. Who was he? Where was he from? What did he do before the Battle of Gettysburg?
Okay, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. I became interested in Gordon because I'd always been kind of interested in the Confederate Second Corps, Jackson's Second Corps, Ewell, Early, people like that, Rhodes. And in reading about those guys and studying what happened with them, this guy Gordon kept coming up all the time, and it seemed like every time he came up, it seemed like something successful followed him. Somebody once said about Gordon, I thought this was very appropriate, and I think it was said during one of our Gettysburg anniversary tours, that the more Gordon advanced in rank, the better he did, and how rare that was. So that's kind of how I got involved in it. So here we go. When you get tired of his bio, you just let me know.
Okay. No, keep going.
He was born on February 6, 1830, 2. So he would have been about 31 when he was at Gettysburg. He was the fourth of 12 children. His father was a Baptist minister in northwestern Georgia. He entered the University of Georgia as a second semester sophomore. So apparently he had had some private education that accounted for some credits when he first went to the University of Georgia. But he ended up withdrawing in October of 1852 in his junior year, supposedly to go to help his father work in some coal mines the family owned in northwestern Georgia. And he got involved with his law firm and fell in love with the daughter of one of the partners, Fanny Harrelson. And so they think he may have left to marry her, and he did in 1854. He worked for the law firm, but he left it in 1855 to become a reporter in the Georgia General Assembly in 1856. And eventually he returned to the coal mines and entered politics. He became an orator. That's really significant because one of the things that led to his success, according to some of his men, was the way that he addressed them before they went into battle, that he inspired them. So I thought that was very important. So that's his background. We'll get to the Civil War right now. When the war began after the firing on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, he raised a company from northwestern Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. If you've ever been to that area, where the Chickamauga battlefield is.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, that was my phone. Go ahead.
Where the Chickamauga battlefield is, he actually grew up in that area, right, pretty much on those same fields. And so that area, if you've ever been down to Chickamauga, Chattanooga, there's 3 states that come together there where Lookout Mountain is.
Okay.
And that's Georgia, Alabama to the west, Tennessee directly to the north. I mean, it's one of those places where you can almost stand in 3 states at one spot.
Okay.
So he formed a company from those 3 states. And this answers one of the questions that was asked about he was from Georgia, but he comes up through commanding Alabama regiments. Well, he started this. The company he started was originally cavalry. And they went to Milledgeville, which was the capital of Georgia at that time, to enlist as Georgia troops. And back then, everybody thought they could lick the other side real easily. And there was a quota of troops that had already been raised for the state of Georgia. So they said, well, we don't really have a need for any more troops. So he took the men to Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay.
Alabama was still forming troops.
All right.
And they were accepted as a company, and Gordon was elected as a captain. If you know about Civil War organizations, you know that a lot of times if you are responsible for recruiting a lot of guys. If you say like a lawyer or somebody like that has a lot of money and you can get 25 guys together, they'll often make you a captain. And they actually had an election. He was elected captain of the unit. And they were asked, well, what a lot of times these companies actually had their own names. And Gordon had to think quickly when they said, well, what's the name of your company? And he said, well, we're the Mountain Rifles. And one of the guys in the company said under his breath, and Gordon actually heard it, he said, wait, no, Mountain Rifles, we're Raccoon Roughs. And so they became known as the Raccoon Roughs.
I like that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Mountain Hell. Ain't no Mountain Rifles, we're the Raccoon Roughs. In any case, they were accepted. And
that was Mike Lentz, by the way, who asked that question.
Mike Lentz.
Yeah.
And so he came up through Alabama. It's kind of similar to Rhodes, who Gordon served under a good part of the war. Rhodes was originally from Virginia and went to VMI. But when he didn't get a teaching job, Stonewall Jackson got it. Uh-huh. He moved to Rhodes, I'm talking about, moved to Alabama and got involved in engineering. So then he enlisted in Alabama. So it's not unusual that this would happen. And Gordon's unit, their company, the Raccoon Roughs, became part of the 6th Alabama. Regiment, which, as you're going to see, was in some pretty hot spots in the war. He was within, this is like April. This is April, early May, that the regiment's formed. And he's elected major by the 14th of May, 1861. So the war is not even exactly 1 month old, and he's already a major. And, of course, I think what they would do then is they'd take the companies and all the company officers, the captains. And this particular regiment actually had 12 companies as opposed to the normal 10 that had infantry. Because remember, they started out as cavalry, and quite often cavalry had 12 troops or companies. So that wasn't real unusual. But in any case, they took all the captains, and then from them they would elect the regimental officers, the colonel, lieutenant colonel, and major. And Gordon was unanimously elected major on May 14th, 1861, within a month. So you can see he's already moving up fast.
Did they keep that election system throughout the war, or did they end that eventually?
I think they did it. I don't know how long through the war they did it. When units were formed at the beginning of the war, it was pretty popular. I know it was particularly on the Confederate side. And they did it mostly up to the regimental level. Once you get past regimental, you get into brigades, that's all pretty much appointed by the government, especially on the Union side.
Yeah.
But this did happen to some extent on the Union side as well, at the company
The
level.
Elections.
Yes.
Right, in the beginning.
Electing officers at the company level and maybe even to some extent the regimental level.
Okay.
So he is assigned to the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Corps, which the 1st Corps was commanded by Richard Ewell at that time. And, of course, we normally associate Ewell with the 2nd Corps. He spent his time at night educating himself in the science of war. He had no military training, none. And by the end of the war, he's commanding half of Lee's army. That's what's so remarkable about this guy. So he's in the months after the first Manassas, first Bull Run in July of 61, he's spending a lot of time training and drilling guys and teaching himself tactics and training guys. He gets promoted to lieutenant colonel before the year is even out, the day after Christmas, 1861. We're not even 1862, he's lieutenant colonel of 6th Alabama.
Okay.
And now he's joined Robert Rhodes's brigade of D.H. Hell's division.
What is spurring on these promotions? Is it just, people are dying or getting sick or out of service in one way or another, and it's the position has to be filled, or is he?
Well, obviously, for a position to be open,
somebody's got to be out of it. Yeah.
So, I'm sure some of this, but we're not even at 1861, and we've only really had in the East, First Manassas and Ball's Bluff, and there's some battles down in Virginia, but kind of small in West Virginia. Not real big battles.
So, and in those battles, is he performing particularly gallantly, or
he's not involved in too many battles? He wasn't even really involved too much at First Manassas. The first real battle he gets involved in is Seven Pines outside Richmond. But I think the men were they were very impressed with him.
Yeah.
They were inspired by his oratorical abilities.
Okay.
He was inspiring, and you'll see this as we go along.
Okay.
He was in Rhodes's brigade by April 6th of 1862. Unanimously, again, elected colonel of the unit on April 28th, 1862, while entrenching at Yorktown. So now we're in the Peninsula Campaign in April of 62, and he is a colonel of the unit already. It's been 1 year since he's been in command, and yet he hasn't really been in any battles.
Right.
So it says something about how the men feel about him, I think.
Yeah.
He didn't really see any action during the retreat up the peninsula toward Richmond in May of 62, but Seven Pines outside Richmond. And that battlefield is east of Richmond. It's very close to where the Richmond International Airport is today. If you've ever been down there. And here we go. Seven Pines. He addresses and inspires the troops before pushing the Federals back through swampland. He drove federal pickets to their entrenchments, and his unit advanced to the first Union line of defense, then back to earthworks, and finally abandoned Union camps. Somehow he escapes unscathed from that battle. His brother was wounded, his horse was killed, and he did have bullets that pierced his clothing. So this started to create a myth throughout the units and the men that fought under him that he was sort of invincible because he takes all these bullets in his clothing, but he can't be hit.
Right.
We'll find out later on that he
certainly can. Yeah.
He'll make up for that on September 17th, 1862.
Yeah.
Rhodes was wounded in the arm in that Seven Pines battle. So he turns the brigade over to Gordon. Now, this is really interesting. He gets the command of the brigade despite the fact that he's the youngest colonel in the brigade by both age and rank. Now, normally, the senior rank colonel is the one who takes command of the brigade, and Rhodes specifically asked him to take command. So that tells you something about how Robert Rhodes has seen Gordon up to this point, and really has only been involved really in one battle. So
now, real quick there, so you mentioned the senior in rank and also age, but age didn't really have much to do with who is senior at the same rank. It was when you were promoted.
Right.
Right.
The date of the promotion.
You
That's
and I
correct.
could both be colonels, but if you were promoted on September 1st and I was promoted on September 2nd, it doesn't really matter that you're older than me. You had it a day before.
Unless the superior officer, like in this case Rhodes,
Right.
designates that he wants that.
Correct.
You may be a day ahead of me and given the rank of colonel,
Right.
but I may be several years older than you. In which case the superior officer may feel a little bit more comfortable in turning over to somebody more experienced.
Right.
It didn't happen very often.
Nothing quite so much like God on earth as a general on the battlefield.
That's right.
Yes.
And then he's the youngest one, the regimental commander in the brigade, and he's being selected by Rhodes to take command.
Yes.
That really says something.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
And by the way, that unit of his, the 6th Alabama, they lost 60% of their men in that one fight at Seven Pines.
Damn.
So he's already identified as being brave and aggressive, which is treasured commodity at that point.
Sure.
What they're really looking at. After another battle, one of Gordon's men claimed that he never again wanted to hear Gordon speak to the men before going into action. And they asked him why, and he said, because he makes me feel like I could storm hell itself. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now we go to the 7 days, and we're at the end of the 7 days outside Richmond. It's the Battle of Malvern Hill on July 1st, 1 year before Gettysburg, to the day. Okay. He led his men to within 600 yards forward to within 200 yards of enemy guns through artillery fire, and he got closer to the Union batteries at Malvern Hill. I don't know if you've ever been up there or not.
No,
but
not
it's
yet.
it's a long rise up to the Union position where the guns are, so it's kind of it's a deadly space of ground to advance 600 yards across. He got closer to the Union batteries than any other brigade in the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia, and there he suffers 50% casualties. And this is after Seven Pines was 60% casualties a month before. So you wonder where they're getting these guys, or the regiment must be getting pretty small. Then D.H. Hill's division, of which Gordon's regiment belonged to, missed the second battle of Manassas, second Bull Run in late August 62. But they won't miss South Mountain, just a few days before Antietam. The Confederate Army, as you know, had been spread out in Maryland on the way to crossing into Pennsylvania. George McClellan found their orders, realized that they were spread out, and he began to move uncharacteristically quickly toward South Mountain where the Confederates were. So they had to make a stand. The Confederates stayed along South Mountain to allow the Confederate Army behind the mountain to begin to concentrate as the Union Army was approaching. At South Mountain, there's several gaps. There's Reno's Gaps, Tarno's Gap. I think there's 3 major gaps the Confederates had to cover to keep the Union Army from penetrating the mountain.
Fox and Crampton?
Crampton, yes, you're right. And Turner's. And Turner was on the left. And Gordon was on the extreme left of the Confederate defense of Turner. So they were far northern unit. They were about 3/4 mile north of Turner's Gap. And they were being opposed by General Meade's Pennsylvania Reserves,
there you go.
which we were just talking about here in the studio before we started. Gordon was outflanked by half a mile by 3 Federal divisions, and his 6th Alabama held their position until darkness when the Confederates were able to retreat off the mountain in order. And it slowed the Union Army down long enough for Lee to concentrate behind it. This is what Rhodes said about that particular unit, Gordon's unit, 6th Alabama on the far left. He said, they remained intact as the sole organized force opposing the enemy and formed a nucleus around which the defeated could rally. That's what Rhodes said. And Rhodes had a lot to say, and so did D.H. Hill, about Gordon in their reports after the Battle of South Mountain, which was just a few days before Antietam. At Antietam, D.H. Hill's division had been moved from sort of toward the right of the Confederate line toward the center, and they end up being positioned along the famous Sunken Lane. The 6th Alabama, if you've ever seen the Sunken Lane, you know that along the Hagerstown Road, near where the Visitor Center is, the lane, which was a heavily traveled lane, which is why it's sunken, ruts and so forth, goes directly east from the Hagerstown Pike, which runs north-south. And then at a point, it turns to the southwest. Well, Gordon's 6th Alabama was positioned right at that apex, right at that bend. So they were the forward extreme closest unit to the Union attackers, kind of like Sickles at the Peach Orchard at Gettysburg.
Okay.
A salient, sort of like the salient. And General Lee was going through the position in the center, and he was overheard to say, this is the critical position we must hold here. And Gordon stepped in front of the unit and said, so that the men behind him could hear him say to Lee, General Lee, these men are going to stay here until the sun goes down or victory is won. One of my favorite quotes from Gordon. During the fight, he knew that the Union troops outnumbered them heavily. And so as the Union troops approached the position and they came up over a hill, the Confederates could actually see the eagles on top of the flagstaffs as the Union guys were coming up. And he ordered his men to hold fire until, the extreme last minute, when they were like 30 yards away. Took out the entire first line. Second line, the Yankees came up, took them down, third line, fourth line, so forth. Finally, the Union guys took position behind top of a ridge, and there was a lot of firing going back and forth. Both sides tried to flank each other. Eventually, the Confederates were about to be flanked, I believe, on the right. And this is when Gordon starts to make up for all the wounds that he had missed in previous battles. The first wound in the sunken lane hit him in the calf of the right leg. He continued to command. The second one hit him further up on that leg, same leg on the right side. An hour later, he's still fighting. He's had 2 leg wounds on the right leg. He's still fighting an hour later. He takes a third ball through the left arm. This one apparently tore tendons and muscles, and apparently there's a lot of bleeding. And at this point, Gordon said he looked up at the sun, and it seemed like it was standing still. We will stay here, General, until the sun goes down or victory is won. And now he's looking at the sun. Will it hurry up and go down? And the fourth ball pierced his shoulder. I'm not sure which shoulder it was, but that's the fourth wound. He's still fighting. He's losing blood. He remained alert and upright, and then finally he took a fifth ball in the face. It passed under his left cheek and out his jaw and just missed his jugular. He fell forward into his cap and said that he probably would have drowned in his own blood, except that the blood went out the hole that was in his cap, and he managed to breathe. He came to eventually, didn't know what was going on. Didn't know whether he was even dead, decided if he could move a limb, that he must be alive. So he tried to move a limb, felt a lot of pain, realized he was alive, crawled 100 yards to the rear before they came out with stretchers and brought him to the rear.
Wow.
Now, his wife was really, really loyal to him. And like some of the wives, like Elvira Hancock, would travel and try to stay close to him.
Yeah.
And he was in a barn. And as I remember this, he was propped up on hay bales, and his face is all black and blue and misshapen. And his wife demanded that she be given access to come in and see him. And he said, oh, no, don't let her come in. But she was really persistent. So they said he had something called a ripslis in the left arm. I guess.
A what? Spell it.
Eryspellas.
Wait.
Irrepellis.
Do it again. Ready? ERY.
S.
L.
Pellas.
Pellas.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go ahead.
So they say a lot of times this can be fatal because it's some type of streptococcus infection.
It's known as St. Anthony's fire, a relatively common bacterial infection of the superficial layer of the skin, extending to the superficial lymphatic system or vessels beneath the skin. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, so he's kind of in a bad way. And she comes into the barn to see him and emitted what he described as a suppressed scream upon seeing him. And he looks back at his wife and says, this is great. Here's your handsome husband. Been to an Irish wedding. At that moment, that's what he says to his wife. So this is when I begin to think, this guy's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So she ended up painting his wounds, the one in the left arm that they were worried about, with iodine. He said like 400 times. I told him to paint it twice a day. He said that she did like 400 times. But in any case, he saved the arm. It was his unit alone, really, that did not break. Well, that was at South Mountain. But Rhodes said about Gordon at Antietam, he handled his regiment in a manner never heard or seen equaled during this war. And then DHL division commander said, Colonel Gordon, the Christian hero, excelled his former deeds at Seven Pines and in the battles around Richmond. Our language is not capable of expressing a higher compliment. He called him the Chevalier Bayard of the Army, DHL. Okay, so this answers another question. Another question was, so Gordon is from Georgia, but he commands Alabama troops, and And then why does he end up with Georgia troops later around Chancellorsville? He's recovering from wounds for about 7 months. He did not return to duty from those wounds until the following March 30th of 1863. What had happened is they had replaced the losses in D.H. Hill's division. At this point, they realized that he was up for brigade command, but all the brigades had been filled in Hill's, now Rhodes is now commanding.
Right.
On January 1st, 1863, Hill was sent to North Carolina, and Rhodes wasn't officially promoted, but he was temporary command of the division.
You're talking D.H. Hill or A.P. Hill?
D.H. Hill.
D.H. Hill.
Daniel Harvey Hill. And so Gordon was up for brigadier, but there were no positions in his old division. So as it turned out, a guy named Lawton had been wounded severely at Antietam, and he had a brigade in Early's division.
Okay.
So the fact that he was a Georgian, they gave Gordon temporary command of Lawton's old brigade, and when it came time to consider transferring him back over to his original division, the men of the brigade begged to have Gordon remain in command. And so they at least said, you know what, they're Georgians, he's a Georgian anyhow. And so that's where he
gives
remains.
Good speeches,
and
so
he gives
let's
good
keep
speeches,
him.
and they like him, yep.
Okay.
He is involved at what they call the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, which was really Chancellorsville. But of course, if you know, Early's division did not go west to deal with the battle at Chancellorsville. They stayed at Fredericksburg up on Marie's Heights.
Okay.
To prevent any Union movement across the Rappahannock River, which is exactly what happened. The Union Sixth Corps was left across the river.
Yeah.
They attacked, and that's where Gordon was with Early's division. Marie's Heights fell, but Gordon's brigade managed to retake, and the division managed to retake Marie's Heights on May 4th outside Fredericksburg, and drove Sedgwick back. He then is reappointed brigade commander officially by Robert E. Lee on May 11th, 1863.
Okay.
So now we're about a year into his command, and he's a brigadier general.
He's a brigadier general.
So he's moving up fast.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into the Gettysburg Campaign.
All right, let's get to it. So he's a brigadier general now.
Yeah.
He's in command
in Early's division.
He's in command of Georgia.
Georgians. Six, and actually, I think it was the biggest brigade in Early's division. It had 6 regiments.
Okay.
And on the way to Gettysburg, they stopped by Winchester, where Robert Milroy had a Union division, I think.
Division, yeah.
And forts. And most of Early's division went around the west of Winchester and attacked from the west toward the east. Gordon was left south of town, kind of as a diversion.
A nose holder.
Perhaps.
Hold him by the nose so you could kick him in the pants.
There you go. He drove the enemy, Gordon's men did, to Bowers Hill south of Winchester. Captured Bowers Hill while Early was attacking the Union forts from the west of Winchester. Early said of Gordon at Winchester, he reflected equal credit upon himself and his brigade. And Ewell, who's now Early's immediate superior, said the rapid and skillful advance was one of the finest movements witnessed during the war, one that won for his troops and their brilliant commander the highest commendation. That came from Ewell at Winchester. On the 14th was actually the day that Gordon captured Bowers Hill south of Winchester. This is what one of the Confederate artillerymen in Early's division said about Gordon. Another one of my favorite quotes. He said, he's the most prettiest thing you ever did see on a field of fight. It had put fight into a whipped chicken just to look at him.
Wow.
Just to look at him. So that's one of the quotes I always thought was pretty cool.
Jeez.
So we get to Gettysburg, and do we have time for human interest?
We have time for anything you want, Jim.
I really like this story a lot. It involves this area of Pennsylvania. You know, Gordon's men, along with most of the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia, Second Corps, were raiding throughout south central Pennsylvania for supplies in the days before the battle. And I think this particular story occurred probably after Gordon. Remember, Gordon had come through Gettysburg on June 26th. It was his men that actually came in. The rest of Early's division went north of town.
Right.
And they were here less than 24 hours. By the next morning, Saturday morning, June 27th, they were outside town. They moved to the east, out to York Road. And so they moved into York County on their way to York. And there was a story where the men were camping in different places, and they would take fences down and use them burn for heat and for cooking and so forth.
Yes.
And somewhere probably in York County between Gettysburg and York, a farmer came running up to Gordon, his headquarters, and said, General, your men, they're taking my fences down, and the cattle are getting all over, and is there something you can do? And Gordon said, yeah, I'll see what I can do. So he goes out to the men, and he said, guys, you got to stop taking these fences down. Lee has given us very specific orders about how to behave here in the enemy's country. And the men were like, well, sir, we absolutely need timber to, for our campfires. And he said, all right, I'll tell you what, only take the top rail. Okay?
Yeah.
So the next morning, the farmer comes running back up to Gordon's headquarters, and he says, General, your men have taken all the fences. I thought you told them they weren't going to, only take the top rail. And so Gordon went back to the men, and he said, I told you guys you could only take the top rail. And the men looked back at him and said, well, General, that's the only one we ever took. Because when you take the top rail off, the next one becomes the top rail.
And the next guys that come up are taking the top rail.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think he says in his memoirs, he goes, I had to admit that they got me there, or something to that effect.
He was the first of the Confederates to enter Gettysburg on June 26th. If you don't count the battle on July 1st, his men were really the first to enter on June 26th, Friday, and then the same for York.
Now, in his memoirs, Reminiscences of the Civil War, for those of you interested in reading it, he talks about this when they come through and everything, and he remarked to his staff that he says, I expressed to my staff the opinion that if the battle should be fought at Gettysburg, the army which held the heights would probably be the victor. The insignificant encounter I had on those hills impressed their commanding importance upon me as nothing else could have done. He's talking about his encounter with the 26th...
Emergency militia, which basically ran when they saw him coming.
Yeah, but do historians believe that he actually said this, or is this him trying to? Because aren't there stories of people like Hooker, for example, saying afterwards that, I said that if there's going to be a fight, it's going to be at Gettysburg, and and not that it really matters, but I'm trying to just give people a sense of there is some kind of. I wouldn't say controversy, but people are calling into question, the veracity of some of these stories.
Yeah, after the war, he was very concerned about bringing the country back together. He wasn't what you'd call an unreconstructed rebel like Jubal Early, who basically kept on fighting the war. And so he went on a speaking tour. And as I said, he was a great speaker, but he liked to tell stories. I think the Barlow-Gordon incident here at Gettysburg on the first day probably was exaggerated to some extent, but just to make a good story,
Yeah.
The thing is, he came in the way Pettigrew's men came in at the beginning of the battle, the day before the battle on June 30th, on the Chambersburg Road. And so what he would have seen is those rolling ridges. Some of his men, ended up shooting Sando right down the road here from where we are.
Yeah.
Down between Cemetery Ridge and Culp's Hill.
You're talking about George Washington Sando of the 21st Pennsylvania.
21st Pennsylvania Cavalry, that's correct. So I don't know that he really got out of town much, whether he saw much of the heights south of town. Possibly did, but remember, they came in the afternoon of the 26th and were gone by sunup the 27th.
But you don't have to go, unlike today, you don't really have to go south of town to see the heights because the town didn't sprawl out the way it did. You didn't have the tree cover that we have today that blocks your view.
Yeah.
So you could have seen from the top of Baltimore Street right before the hill goes down, to the Farnsworth House, that area there. If you're up like High Street, if you're up by the courthouse.
Yeah, that's true, Matt.
Or no, I'm sorry. Wait, courthouse is on Middle Street, right? So the next one, High Street. If you're up in that area, you can see.
You can certainly see Cemetery
back then what you can't see today. Yeah.
You can certainly see Cemetery Hill. I don't know how much of Culp's Hill he saw. I don't know how much of the Round Tops he saw, but chances are if he came over Seminary Ridge, he probably saw somewhat of the heights south of town, so maybe he did have a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything that confirms
it. Oh, that's a good point, too. Just coming over Seminary Ridge, you could see all that stuff.
The trees were a little lower back then.
Yeah.
So
they made the trees shorter back in those days.
That's right. But I don't know that he did, but he may have said that. I don't know.
But right, okay, so
my guess is, that may have been one of those things, like you said, that afterwards he might never have thought of again, except that the battle ended up coming back to Gettysburg and is fought there, and so he
had to be prescient.
Yeah, whether it's true or not.
Right. Because, at the time, Gettysburg wasn't much of anything to anybody. It was just this town to pass through on the way to bigger objectives.
Yeah, it's a major road network, but, it was 2,400 people, which doesn't sound like much now, but it was only 100 people shy of being a city back then.
Oh, really? Is
2,500 people was a city back then.
Oh, interesting.
So Gettysburg is, it is a major road network. So back then it was probably more of a significant town than what we think of today, other than the battle.
Right.
Well, today it's a big thing.
Well, now, of course, yeah. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, they go farther east than any of the Confederate Army, and they make it all the way to the Susquehanna River at Wrightsville, opposite the river from Columbia on the Lancaster side. This gets into one of the questions that was presented to us. The original plan, as I read it, was that Ewell wanted to burn the bridge over the Susquehanna at Wrightsville to prevent Union reinforcements from coming from the direction of Philadelphia or Lancaster from the east to interfere with the Confederate invasion.
Okay.
But then Early, who was apart from Ewell had followed roads up the Cumberland Valley toward Harrisburg, and Ewell was on his own. He actually wanted to cross the bridge to save it, cross it with his Confederate troops, gather horses in Lancaster County, and not go toward Philadelphia, but rather turn back toward Harrisburg and attack Harrisburg from the east side of the river, while the rest of the Second Corps, Johnson and Rhodes, are attacking from the west side.
Okay.
But when Gordon got to Wrightsville, Union militia had set fire to the bridge. They retreated across the bridge partway, set it on fire about halfway across, and retreated back to Columbia. Well, the problem was that the fire made its way to the Wrightsville side of the river, the west side of the river.
Okay.
And there's a lumber yard right on the edge of town where the river is. So the fire is getting into the lumber yard, and now the town itself is in danger of being set afire by Union troops actually set the bridge apart.
Right.
And what Gordon's men did is they formed a bucket brigade, and they managed to take water out of the river and extinguish the fire before it burnt the town down.
And he says that while the bridge is burning, he's trying to get buckets and pails or whatever he can get from the townspeople, but they're like, oh, we don't know where they are. They're not around. And then as soon as this fire spread to the lumberyard, they're like, oh, look they just appeared out of nowhere.
How about that?
And then they were able to, So
and he was furious because afterwards, northern newspapers reported that he tried to burn the town down.
Right.
And he was furious because he's the one that saved the town. They weren't the ones that even set the fire.
Right, because if they had just left it there and let the fire spread, they wouldn't have been able to put that out, probably without the help of all those men just creating that line all the way from the river.
So you imagine his frustration at reading that.
Hell yeah.
So
certainly can. Well, so the question, though, since we're on the bridge, what I'm going to start doing now that we're into the Gettysburg campaign, I'm going to start peppering in the questions as they come up.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll get them all. Spencer Frogner, he mentions the Wrightsville Bridge. He says, I always hear a lot about the Wrightsville Bridge burning when one mentions Gordon. If the bridge had been successfully dynamited, and just a little note there, dynamite wasn't invented until 1867 by Alfred Nobel. But instead it was burned entirely. Would Gordon have been ordered to stay put in Wrightsville and make a bid to fix the destroyed span and continued Early's wishes of marching into Lancaster? Or was a major battle to the west of Gordon's position inevitable regardless of what transpired at Wrightsville?
It's inevitable that he has to leave. The Susquehanna River is about as deep as it gets anywhere along its course at Wrightsville. I heard at one point deep is like 75 feet.
Okay.
I think this past summer they were given depths and it was like 39 or 40 feet, which is pretty deep for the Susquehanna. Whereas like at Harrisburg, you could almost ford it.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so once it's a mile-long bridge. You can still cross. There's a modern bridge, Route 462 bridge, that parallels the piers that are still there where the old wooden bridge was. And it's a long walk. I've walked across that bridge before. And so trying to get over to Lancaster County, even if they'd wanted to at that point, wouldn't have been practical. But by this point, Lee had learned that the Union Army I think it was the night of the 28th or early on the 28th of June that Meade's army was at Frederick, a couple days march away. So he realized he had to concentrate his army. And most of Early's division was at York, which is about 12 miles west of Wrightsville. So Gordon really had no choice but to rejoin Early, and then they marched back toward Gettysburg from the east.
Okay. And by the way, I didn't mean to, belittle Spencer by pointing out that dynamite wasn't invented till 1967. I just wanted to point that out.
No, they just stuffed the bridge, I think, with hay and set it on fire.
Yeah.
The local militia, before Gordon could take the bridge.
Back then, they probably just would have had kegs of powder.
Right.
And then just use that. But I know what he meant by dynamited, but
yeah,
I didn't want other people to think that he meant literally dynamite.
Which, right.
I think he just meant blown up.
Blown up.
Yes. Okay. So he says, thank you and Merry Christmas and hopefully an apocalypse-free New Year. Thank you, Spencer. Happy holidays to you and yours as well. Okay, so I think that's all we had on the Wrightsville incident.
Yeah, Gordon rejoins Early's division at York, and they continue to the west to Gettysburg. Camped about 10 miles northeast of Gettysburg, not too far from Heidlersburg, and then marched pretty much south to the battlefield, arriving around 3:30. It's Gordon's men who are on the extreme Confederate left coming in along the Harrisburg Road northeast of town. They're the ones that are going to attack and overrun Barlow's Knoll. As they overran Barlow's Knoll, one of the artillerymen in Early's artillery came upon Gordon and said, "General, where are your dead men?" And Gordon answered, "I haven't got any, sir. The Almighty has covered my men with his shield and buckler." So, kind of colorful. I think it was the same artilleryman, I think his name was Robert Stiles, saw Gordon mounted on his horse Milroy, which he captured at
from
Winchester
Milroy.
from Milroy. And he was a black stallion. And he said it was a magnificent black stallion captured at Winchester, and it was the most glorious and inspiring thing that Stiles had ever seen as he sees Gordon mounted on Milroy. He said it was a splendid picture of gallantry, standing in his stirrups, bareheaded, hat in hand, arms extended, and in a loud voice like a trumpet, exhorting his men. Stiles described it as superb, absolutely thrilling. So he was inspiring not only through his oratory, what he would say to the men before going into battle, but actually his appearance on the battlefield.
Yeah.
He said he was ramrod straight. He'd sit in the saddle absolutely straight up. As a matter of fact, in another battle, a guy had said something to Gordon about he'd been wounded through the jacket. As I said, I know at Seven Pines he'd been wounded several times to the clothing, but wasn't wounded. And one of his subordinate officers said, "Gordon, are you hurt?" And he said, "No," he said, "because I'm standing straight up." He said, "If you had been standing straight up like that, instead of slouching," he said, "you might avoid being shot yourself." So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking at these pictures of him, and he looks to have a very straight back in all of them. I mean, I know they put those, oftentimes they would put those things to hold you straight, but still, I mean, they put when I do a tintype, they put those on my neck, and I still look like a slouched over fat man. So, I mean, he does have a straight spine for sure here in this. But yeah, he does make like a dashing figure too. Like I could picture him in this uniform on a horse, no hat on, a sword in the air. He's yelling, and his goatee and everything. Like he's a striking individual. Somebody did a painting of that moment that Stiles was talking about, and I saw it. It was displayed in the hallway in the visitor center here at Gettysburg, just outside the bookstore. And I would have loved to have purchased it. I never did. But I don't know. They don't have a lot of prints for sale anymore at the bookstore, I don't think. But I'd love to get that painting. Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, I know which painting you're talking about. It's a pretty cool one.
But his men marched 14 miles that day, and they arrived on the left. And if you know much about the first day at Gettysburg, you know that Rhodes is making an attack from Oak Hill to the right of Gordon, to the west, and the 11th Corps actually stretched across the north of town and kind of overlapped Dole's, which was Rhodes's far left. And Gordon came in on Dole's left at exactly the right moment to hit the 11th Corps at Barlow's Knoll and overwhelm it. And so apparently, to some extent, saved Rhodes on that day. He had 1,200 men, Gordon did, in the brigade, and disabled somewhere between 12 and 1,500, captured 1,800 in less than an hour, and suffered less than 380 casualties.
Wow.
Ewell said about him, Gordon's brigade that evening put out of combat a greater number of the enemy in proportion to his own numbers than any other command on either side ever did from the beginning to the end of the war.
Huh.
As now, one of your listeners had mentioned the Barlow-Gordon incident. Where Gordon comes upon the wounded Union officer Barlow of New York, supposedly aids him and has his subordinates get Barlow to shelter. Barlow gives Gordon letters that were actually love letters, I think, to his wife, and asked him if he can find his wife who's accompanying or staying close to the army, the Union Army, if Gordon will get them to him, and he agrees. And a lot of people had brought that into question, and the question that was asked to us was that there used to be an interpretive marker at Barlow's Knoll that talked about the Barlow-Gordon incident.
That's a Mike Lentz question also.
Well, in the last few decades, that's been brought into question. Was that more of an invention of Gordon's, while he was on his post-war speaking tour around the country, where he's trying to bring the country back together again, and that this was an ideal story, to encapsulate that brotherhood, that the two officers after the war discover each other they're both senators, I think, at a dinner, and Barlow had thought Gordon had been killed because his cousin James Gordon had been, a cavalry officer had been killed, and Barlow supposedly thought that was Gordon, and Gordon didn't think that Barlow survived his wound at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Are you the Barlow who had died at Gettysburg? And Barlow says, I am the man, sir. And Barlow says, are you the Gordon that killed me? And I am the man, sir. And supposedly they became very close friends. I've always thought that it would have been very difficult for Gordon, given the rank he had at the end of the war, and Barlow commanding a division, especially during the Appomattox campaign after the fall of Petersburg, that they wouldn't know who the commanding officers were of these
other units. Yeah.
I mean, you capture a guy from a unit, who's your commander,
Gordon.
Right.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that they would have known that each was alive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Before the war ended. So that tells me that maybe there was some exaggeration and some invention. I think probably what happened is it was probably one of Gordon's subordinates that ran into Barlow and that aided him. And then Gordon heard the story and then incorporated it into his story as he told his post.
So you don't think Gordon even came upon him at all?
It's possible.
So you just throwing it? Okay.
But the fact that they said that they never really knew and expected that each other was alive after the war until they met at the Senate dinner, like in 1879.
Right.
That's just hard for me to believe that many years later that neither one knew that the other was still alive. So it kind of makes me think that maybe it was a case where.
Well, so Gordon in his book, let me see if I can find that because I copied it here. So Gordon thinks that Barlow. Here it is. Okay. The following summer in battle near Richmond, my kinsman with the same initials, General J.B. Gordon of North Carolina, was killed. Barlow, who had recovered, saw the announcement of his death and entertained no doubt that he was the Gordon whom he had met on the field of Gettysburg. To me, therefore, Barlow was dead. To Barlow, I was dead. Nearly 15 years had passed between either of us was undeceived, or before either of us was undeceived. During my second term in the United States Senate, the Honorable blah, 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 was a member of the House, blah, 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 blah. He invited me to dinner in Washington to meet a General Barlow who had served in the Union Army. Potter knew nothing of the Gettysburg incident. I had heard that there was another Barlow in the Union Army and supposed, of course, that it was this Barlow with whom I was to dine. Barlow had a similar reflection as to the Gordon he was to meet. Seated at Clarkson Potter's table, I asked Barlow, General, are you the general, or are you related to the Barlow who was killed at Gettysburg? He replied, why, I am the man, sir. Are you related to the Gordon who killed me? I am the man, sir, I responded. No words of mine can convey any conception of the emotion awakened by those startling announcements. Nothing short of an actual resurrection from the dead could have amazed either of us more. Thenceforward, until his untimely death in 1896, the friendship between us, which was born amidst the thunders of Gettysburg, was greatly cherished by both. So I don't know. I mean, I believe that's a believable story to me.
It's possible. I think if Gordon had encountered Barlow, given the moment in the battle, the Union troops are retreating, Gordon's men are overrunning Barlow's Knoll, that Barlow, he may have stopped and had a few words with Barlow, but probably it's his duty to continue on with the men.
Right.
He probably had a subordinate officer say, take care of this man, see to him
Finish
that he gets,
it up, yeah.
He's a high-ranking officer, find him shelter. When he was taken eventually to the Crawford House, which is right on the edge of town today, where Harrisburg Road comes into Lincoln Street, I think it is. Very close to where...
Yeah, Lincoln.
Where
yeah.
Stratford...
No, yes, Lincoln.
North...
it's that white house, isn't it?
Yeah.
That white
and then eventually
brick
he was taken
house.
back to the Benner House.
Yeah.
And moved over there. But it's the white brick house, you're right.
No, he was to the Benner House first, then to the Crawford House.
That might be.
Yeah.
That might be. I know. I think it was at both those places.
Yeah, and then I think he was taken somewhere after the Crawford House too, but I don't remember. But I know.
And then his wife did come and help.
Right.
Barlow's.
Yeah, Barlow's wife.
Just as Gordon's wife had done early in the war.
But Barlow's face wasn't so marred by Saint whatever that was, Anthony's fire or whatever. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so I don't know. The Garla, I like the story though of the two of them meeting.
It's a great story.
You know what it is though? It's let's say it's not true. There are stories like that.
Yeah.
And I guess in a civil war, you're going to find a lot of those because you're all the same countrymen. And so when the war's over, you're going to have dealings with each other afterwards. And, there's a chance that you might find, oh, I thought you were killed at whatever or whatever. So, I mean, maybe it's not literally true or actually true, but it's kind of symbolic of what civil wars are like.
Which is, I think, if that were the case, that Gordon, had created this story, that's why he's doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, right, because he's trying to unite everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that fits perfectly into his purpose of giving these speeches that unite the country.
There was another story in his memoirs, I don't know if you're going to get to it, but about Meade and him.
Just thinking about that.
Okay.
I believe that was in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think you're right.
After the war.
Yes.
And I think Gordon Rose at this dinner or whatever the occasion was. Meade was, I believe, the district commander, post-war commander.
The military governor
like
or something like that.
Governor. Yeah. And so they were at a dinner, and Gordon rose, I guess, to salute Meade.
No.
And then...
They toasted Meade, whoever they are.
Right.
And then someone offered to toast Gordon. And then somebody who didn't fight on either side stood up and objected to fighting someone who wanted to destroy the country. And to that, Meade jumped up.
And said, what you were saying, the war's over now. We're all Americans.
Right.
And, he's a gallant foe, but the war is over.
Right.
And I, am very happy to recognize and salute my
buddy.
Yeah. Well,
whatever he said.
My honorable adversary.
Yeah.
Who is now, an American just like all of us, which is what the whole point was, to bring us all back together again anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. But this guy, but he's Gordon in his memoir is very scathing against this guy because this guy did not fight in the war, but he's one of those people who's brave when there's no danger and like really, really nice cutting him down.
Yeah.
And I love people like that. The critic who has done nothing while people who he criticizes are doing or have done something. Those people are always entertaining.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to anybody in particular. But no, not you, Veronica. No. I'm just saying, in a general sense, I'm just saying that,
Well,
go ahead, Jim.
Gordon ended up being on the far Confederate left on day 2 near the Culp Farm.
Right.
Not really engaged, mainly watching the York Road for Union advances down that road.
Mm-hmm.
And the third day, not really involved because he wasn't involved in the second day at Culp's Hill, so he's not really involved in the third day too much. But he ends up forming the rear guard of the Confederate retreat to the mountains at Fairfield. And it was his brigade that turned as Sedgwick pursued the Confederates. And then Sedgwick sends a message back, hey, the Confederates are still in force here. They're not in a disorderly retreat. They're making a bit of a stand here. And that helps convince Meade to retreat south the same way he came up by moving on this side, the east side of the Blue Ridge and the Catoctons, and then recrossing the mountains west of Frederick to try to cut the Confederates off. That at this point they realized it's not going to be a good idea to try to attack the Confederates in the mountains,
Right.
the rear guard. Because,
Right.
you know, and so, you know, that's what Gordon's duty was on the 5th, was protecting the Army's trains and checking Union pursuit, and was effective.
Now, so he seems to be one of these people who is not too kind to Longstreet. And I'll give some people some examples here, and then we can maybe parse this with things that we know, like the things that we know to not be true. The first thing he says, that General Lee distinctly ordered Longstreet to attack early in the morning of the 2nd, and if he had done so, 2 of the largest corps of Meade's army would not have been in the fight. But Longstreet delayed the attack until 4 o'clock in the afternoon and thus lost his opportunity of occupying Little Round Top, the key to the position, which he might have done in the morning without firing a shot or losing a man. Jim, what is wrong with this criticism of Longstreet? So many things. First of all, let's start with this. Longstreet didn't get the order in the morning, did he? He got it at 11 o'clock-ish in the morning.
Yeah,
And then he was given permission to wait for Law's brigade because he was already down a third of his force and he wanted everything that he did have available to him. So he was given permission to wait for Law.
Right. Pickett's division will stay at Chambersburg guarding the rear and the wagons and so forth. So he only has 2/3.
So he's 2/3 of his force.
Of his corps.
And so he waits for Law's brigade. They don't get there till I think it was like 11:45 or noonish or something, and then they get started. They get started on the march. And then there's the counter march. So he gets into position, you know, I mean, he's only gotten the order at 11 o'clock, and then he gets into position close to 4 o'clock. I mean, it's not terrible. He's got a few miles to march, a couple of tens of thousands of men. I mean, you know, it's not crazy. That doesn't sound to me. But this is kind of the prevailing narrative after the war, that Longstreet was dawdling and he was dragging his heels and throwing a temper tantrum because he didn't get his way and, you know, all that stuff. But do you think that's a fair assessment, or where do you stand on the Longstreet thing?
I've never been really big on Longstreet. I think Longstreet was excellent on the defensive. But when Longstreet was given the reins to act independently, particularly east of Richmond in 62, gets on the wrong roads and winds all screwed up. And of course, Longstreet on the first day wanted to pick up and move, you know, south into Maryland, which wasn't practical at all. But I think what was going on is, we know what happened with Longstreet after the war. He becomes Republican. He's a friend of Grant's, you know, and these Second Corps guys like Early and all are, you know, very much Lee proponents. Many of them are Virginians. And, you know, you got a lot of that lost cause stuff coming out of those guys.
Yeah.
And I think because Gordon was a part of that Second Corps, you know, that's what he's hearing, you know, and that's the way he's seeing things. Although it's ironic because Longstreet made Georgia his adopted home and Gordon is a Georgian. So you would think, perhaps, you know, that Gordon would have taken his side on things. But, you know, Gordon's on the other side of the battlefield. You know, and I think he's depending on what he's hearing.
And he's a brigade commander.
He's a brigade commander.
So how would he be privy to what Longstreet is ordered to do?
I think he's hearing stuff from his superiors probably, and they were upset about it.
When were these memoirs written? Do you remember? Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've looked at that, but I think it was well after the war.
Like 1900s, because he mentions Barlow dying in the
the late 1800s, I believe it was.
1890 something or other, right?
Yeah.
So it had to be 1900s.
I think it was sometime just before he died, and he died in 1904, I believe it was.
Okay. So, so then...
I think it was the late 1800s.
This is a long time, so he's had a lot of time to hear what other people have said and all that other stuff, because he also says that General Lee ordered Longstreet to attack at daybreak on the morning of July 3rd, and that he did not attack until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the artillery opening at 1.
Right.
But Lee was going to continue everything the next day, but then changed his mind. Just tell me what, I'm not totally clear on July 3rd first, the morning of July 3rd and the orders. You know what I mean?
I'm not either, to be honest with you, Matt. All I know is that what Lee originally wanted to do on the 3rd was what he did on the 2nd.
Right, to continue.
He wanted to attack both ends of the Union line.
Right. But
he had captured the peach orchard on the 2nd day.
Right.
Which he thought he could take on the 2nd day and put his artillery there and support an attack there. But then Sickles threw the monkey wrench into the plan by seizing the Peach Orchard before Longstreet could come out and seize it first and put his artillery there.
Right.
So that affected Longstreet right there. And Longstreet has to extend his line.
You're talking on July 2nd.
On the 2nd.
Yeah.
Has to extend his line another mile to delay his attack until 4:30 in the afternoon. That had a lot to do with why the attack came off so late. Can't blame Longstreet for that.
No.
But then Lee said that he felt that if he had the proper concert of action, the proper coordination of attack, Culp's Hill and on the Union left down toward the Round Tops, Devil's Den, Peach Orchard, Wheatfield, he might have had success, especially with the fact that if he'd had the Peach Orchard and had his artillery there on day 2, he would have had that artillery support. Well, now on day 3, he has it. And the plan was, as he said in his report a month later, the general plan for day 3 was unchanged,
right,
which is to attack both ends of the Union line, but to coordinate it better and support it with artillery at the Peach Orchard. It's not practical for him to attack on the Union left at the Round Tops on day 3. Longstreet was the one that told him, General Lee, my men have done the 3 best hours fighting done by any troops on any field, but it's not fair of you to ask my men to attack those rocky heights again today on the 3rd day.
Right.
They've not only entrenched up there, built walls, but they've been heavily reinforced.
And Pickett's arrived
here,
but still the 2/3 that fought the day before took heavy casualties.
Right.
And so now he's going to just continue pushing that. But wasn't there something where Lee wasn't completely sure of what he wanted to do with Pickett, whether it was to add him to Longstreet's force and continue that attack or attack the center?
Yeah, the Confederates had gained a foothold on Lower Culp's Hill on the night of the 2nd. And the next morning at daylight, the Union Army counterattacked, 7 hours of fighting, and then by 11 o'clock in the morning, the Confederates are done.
That was the other thing I was going to bring up was Culp's Hill.
Right.
That wasn't supposed to go off then, as it did, because Lee wanted the 2 flanks to be attacked at the same time, right?
That's Lee's left hook at Culp's Hill on day 3.
Right.
But 11 o'clock in the morning, after 7 hours of fighting, that left hook is off the board.
Done.
They're done.
So no, whatever. Right. So now
you no longer have a left hook. Longstreet's telling you not to attack on the right, so he goes to Plan B. Plan B is to look right across to Cemetery Ridge, a mile to the east, and he said, "There's the Union center." The Union Army must have weakened their center yesterday, the 2nd, to send reinforcements from there to the ends of their lines where we attacked them yesterday. So he's thinking if we attack both ends on day 3 and we have the artillery at the Peach Orchard, we should be successful. But by 11 o'clock in the morning, well, the attack on the right is off the board because Longstreet has talked Lee out and says, I don't think we can be successful there. And then the left hook is off the board by 11 o'clock in the morning when Ewell's men are fought out. So now he's got to go to Plan B, which is, the center. The problem for Lee is that Meade anticipated him and was ready for the attack on the center.
Yes. And then let's see, the final thing he says that, no, it's not the final thing. It's the next to final thing. He says that General Lee, according to the testimony of Colonel Walter Taylor, Colonel C.S. Venable, and General A.L. Long, who were present when the order was given, ordered Longstreet to make the attack on the last day with the 3 divisions of his corps and 2 divisions of A.P. Hill's corps, and that instead of doing so, he sent 14,000 men to assail Meade's army in his strong position and heavily entrenched.
Yeah. Well, Pickett is the smallest, whereas Rhodes's division was the largest with 5 brigades. Pickett's was the smallest. Remember, Pickett should have been the largest division, or as large as Rhodes. But 2 of Pickett's brigades are left in Virginia.
Of course.
And Lee was sending letters back all the time to Jefferson Davis, saying, when are we going to get these brigades sent up here? We desperately need them. And they never showed up. Jenkins and Corse, I think, were the commanders. And so you have a very limited number of guys in Pickett's division, but they're the only fresh troops. The only of Lee's 9 divisions that didn't fight in the first days.
So 3 fresh brigades is what he's got.
Yep, all Virginians. To think that you're going to use Hood's and McLaws' men the next day, less than 24 hours after what they'd done on the 2nd day, is pretty impractical. And plus, they're already advanced.
But it's also impractical to think that you're going to use Heath's and Pender's divisions to assist Pickett because they had a pretty rough lot on the first day.
That's true. But they've rested for the most part on
they've rested. But what's that story, though, with I forget who he's riding with, but Lee's riding with somebody, and he comments, he looks at the men and he says, in Heath's division, I think it is, and he says, oh, these men shouldn't be here. They should be at a hospital because they're all like wounded and bandaged up and everything. And then the person he's with said, sir, if we sent them back, we'd have nobody left, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they weren't in that great a shape, even though they had a day to rest.
That's right.
They had a lot of, what do they call that? Walking wounded? Is that? Yeah.
That's
They had a lot of walking wounded, and that's not really what sounds to me. I mean, I don't know, but it doesn't sound to me like an effective attack force. Bunch of wounded guys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, really he has 3 fresh brigades that have any amount of real strength to them, theoretically,
but it's a fairly small division with 3 brigades.
Yeah. So, okay, and then the last thing he says is that the great mistake of the halt on the first day would have been repaired on the second and even on the third if Lee's orders had been vigorously executed, and that generally died believing. The testimony on this point is overwhelming, that he lost Gettysburg at last by Longstreet's disobedience of orders. It's all Longstreet's fault. He is ordered to halt on the first. He doesn't like that. He spends a lot of time in these memoirs talking about how he doesn't like the fact that he was told to halt. And then yet now, so he's told to halt on the first day, but then it's all on Longstreet to have corrected that for the next 2 days. And I don't know. I don't buy it, Gordon. I don't buy it.
Gettysburg, a nation divided. The battle that changed America. Avatars, generals, artifacts, games, 360-degree views, an immersive battlefield experience. A new way to discover history. Gettysburg, A Nation Divided, an augmented reality narrated by Scott Eastwood.
Download it from your phone's app store today and support Addressing Gettysburg by entering GBurg1863 in the referral code prompt after downloading.
Hey, Gettysburg business owners, 2021 is just around the corner, and that means that in a few months, people will be planning their spring, summer, and fall trips. So why not tell them about your business through Addressing Gettysburg? Did you know that younger families look for shorter vacations and they plan their itinerary before they ever set foot in their destination? Did you know that Addressing Gettysburg provides great exposure to several thousand listeners within a 4 to 8 hour drive of Gettysburg each month, and tens of thousands more outside of that area? Did you know that by the time someone sees your ad in an expensive print publication after they've arrived, they've already made their plans and it's too late to convert them? Or did you know that our listeners have not only a love of the history of Gettysburg, but also of the place itself and the many awesome businesses we have to patronize? With 57% of Americans listening to podcasts these days, there's really no good reason to not get on board with Addressing Gettysburg. So take advantage of our ground floor rates while they last. Contact us at advertise@addressinggettysburg.com. That's advertise@addressinggettysburg.com. Okay, so then what happens after Gettysburg?
With Gordon?
With Gordon, yeah.
Not too much until the following spring, when Grant comes east and they begin the Overland Campaign.
Okay.
They're back to where they started before Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. Lee is near the Rappahannock River, near Fredericksburg, in the Union Army this time. Leaves the winter encampment.
So Gettysburg is finished. They get back into Virginia.
Yeah.
And he goes straight to Fredericksburg, that area? Lee,
the Union Army took a position. Both armies sent troops west, detached, so they were smaller than what they were at Gettysburg. And of course, they'd taken so many losses here. I think only 3 of the original 7 corps that fought at Gettysburg are still with Meade in Virginia the following fall.
As they were.
Right.
You mean because why? Because the 11th and 12th Corps go to the west.
Right. They combine, become the 20th Corps, go west. They're gone.
Okay.
The 1st Corps and the 3rd Corps suffered so many casualties that they essentially ceased to be corps anymore. And they used the rest of those men to fill in losses in the remaining corps. 2nd, 5th, 6th.
So instead of building up the 1st and 3rd, they just dissolved them and spread them out.
Right.
Was there ever a 1st Corps again or a 3rd Corps in the Army?
I do not believe there was, Matt.
No, there wasn't. Okay.
And if it wasn't, they certainly weren't known by it.
Oh, right. Okay. So that was it.
Yeah.
Gettysburg was pretty much the end for those two.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while for these armies to recover. And then, like I said, even after the losses from the battle, they detach men to the Western Theater.
Yeah.
11th and 12th Corps.
Oh, right. So they're gone too.
Yeah. So they're just skeletons, really, of the armies that fought here at Gettysburg. But there was some action where Lee made movements towards Washington, and the Union troops were west of the city, and kind of held it off. But there wasn't anything really major until Grant came east, and then they added to the Army of the Potomac. They added part of the Army of the James, and then all of a sudden it's a very different army. Grant is essentially in command. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to see a whole lot until we get to the Wilderness.
No big battles in the Eastern Theater between.
Not like we're used to up to this point.
Right. Just a couple maybe small engagements and things, but nothing huge.
It really almost takes the two armies 10 months to recover from Gettysburg.
Chickamauga is going to be a big one, but that's out
September.
west, and that's Longstreet is sent out there.
Right.
But go ahead.
Well, by January of 1864, Lee sends to Davis the message. He says, "I think General Gordon of Alabama is one of our best." And so his star is, I won't say on the rise, it continues to rise. The next major battle is at the Wilderness, along the Orange Plank Road. Grant crossed the Rapidan, I believe it is, from Culpeper to the north, and began to move on Lee, who was west of Fredericksburg. And they're fighting along the Orange Plank Road in what is called Saunders Field. And the Confederates were giving way, and Gordon made a counterattack, slowed the Union advance until it got dark and kind of stabilized things. The next day, he was moved from the Confederate right across the Orange Plank Road to the left, where he found that the Union right 6th Corps was, as they say, up in the air. It was unsupported. And Gordon was able to get around it. There were an original reconnaissance was sent, came back, hey, they're out in the open, we can outflank them totally. They sent a second reconnaissance out, confirmed the first reconnaissance. So then Gordon himself went out there into the woods. It's a really thick wooded area. And he actually got down on his hands and knees and actually got close enough to hear Yankees talking, and completely confirmed that, this entire Union right flank along the Orange Plank Road west of Fredericksburg is completely open. And he went to his superior Early, who didn't want to do it, didn't believe it, went to Ewell, who seemed to be somewhat receptive, but was hesitant to do anything.
Okay.
Gordon claims that Lee came over to the Confederate left around 5:30 from the Confederate right, where he'd been most of the day, and that Gordon, told him this is open, and that supposedly Lee gave him permission to go ahead with the attack. Whether that actually happened or not, I don't know, but eventually Gordon was given permission to make the attack. They did outflank the Union line. There was a problem, though. The Confederates were facing the Union troops, and Gordon's men are hitting the Union guys in flank, so they're actually going right across the front of the Confederate line. Well, I don't know if you've ever been down there or not.
No.
It's a very thickly wooded area.
Yeah.
And because of the delay and whether or not to make the attack, it started to get dark, and the Confederates are actually being fired at their own men as they're driving the Union flank. They're now going across the main part of the Confederate line. And so
they're crossing in between the lines?
Well, they're driving the Yankees back on their and the Confederates who were facing the Union troops now see these Confederates going across their front like left to right.
Like at an oblique angle.
Yeah, and they're firing into not realizing these are Confederates that are flanking the Union line.
Okay.
And so you've got this friendly fire going on. It's getting dark. And the Union line eventually was driven back, but it was stabilized, and they couldn't really go any further. So that pretty much ended the fighting there. I think Gordon drove 2 brigades back, captured both the commanders of the brigades, the Union brigade commanders, plus 600 men, killed 400. But the darkness created the confusion, and they actually only suffered about 50 casualties, but half of those were inflicted by the Confederates themselves, as their own men were flanking across their front.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We're facing each other here. We're going to go this way, so we're driving the Union Army this way, and the fire's going.
Yeah.
I'm making signals with my hands for Matt here. I realize you can't see what I'm doing.
But basically, if you would just imagine 2 lines for argument's sake, parallel to each other.
Right.
And then a third line is coming in at an oblique angle between the two lines.
Yeah,
essentially.
at a perpendicular angle.
Yeah.
And it's driving the one side back
Yes.
or left to right across the Confederate front. So now the Confederates are going across their main line left to front. And these original Confederates that aren't making their flank attack, in the darkness, see these guys moving left to right and think they're Yankees, and they're actually Confederates flanking the Union line.
Right. It's
So-
just darkness and confusion. And
I'll tell you, the wilderness, if you ever go down there,
I mean, I was there when I was a kid. I don't remember anything, so I need to go back down
in
there.
broad daylight, it's confusing. It's so
I would imagine.
But you can imagine at nighttime. And
Yeah.
then you add smoke and confusion of battle.
Fires.
Fires, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. you
Oh,
gotta
it
see-
had to be hell.
Exactly.
Absolute hell.
Well, the next day, May 7th, 1864, Gordon actually took over Early's division. A.P. Hill, who we know always got sick,
Yeah.
seems like,
Yeah.
he took ill. And so Early was promoted to temporarily take over the 3rd Corps, A.P. Hill. So that left the division open for Gordon to take command of the division.
Okay.
Which is, it's temporary.
Sure.
But now he's essentially division commander.
Well, so real quick though, so we talked about changes in the Army of the Potomac afterwards. What were the changes in the Army of Northern Virginia after the battle? By the time we get to Wilderness, because Early's promoted to take temporary command of the Third Corps, but was he in the Third Corps?
No.
So he was moved over from. So he's still in the Second Corps,
right.
But he was moved over to take command.
Right. The basic organization that Lee created before Gettysburg, taking 2 corps, making them into 3, still exists.
Okay.
In the following spring. It's just they've lost a lot of troops.
Right.
And of course, Longstreet's guys are. Well, Longstreet was at Wilderness. He is on the Confederate right, and this is the Second Corps on the left. And so you still pretty much have the 3 corps there.
Okay.
So, well, as you know, the next day, May 8th, now we're in a whole other battle, Spotsylvania. And everybody talks about the mule shoe. It's like a sail. It's like an outgrowth of the Confederate line, almost like the Bulge, the Battle of the Bulge. And Gordon was put in reserve, like at the base of the Bulge. There was an attack by Emory Upton of the Union side on the 10th that was kind of unique at that time. It was an attack in depth where they had found that they were able to make breaks in enemy lines. But then what happened is reinforcements would often pour in and close it up. And so what you needed was guys to come in behind the initial breakthrough that could then split the enemy line and hold it. Kind of like Pickett's charge.
Pickett's, yeah.
You were able to break through, but they couldn't. There were just too few troops to hold it.
Yeah.
So now this is the Union guys the following spring, and Upton makes this attack in depth, and it was right in the middle of the Confederate line, and Confederate line stretched for really miles, but the Bulge was in the center, and Gordon was in the middle, and he was in reserve. He managed to close the breach that Upton had made on May 10th, and then recaptured some of General Robert Rhodes's earthworks that had been captured in the Muleshoe salient at Spotsylvania. 2 days later was the big day at Spotsylvania, May 12th. That's when Hancock makes the attack on the same salient. Upton's attack kind of came slightly to the left of the salient, and Hancock is right down the middle pretty much. 4:30 in the morning. It's not even daylight out. There's fog and mist. The fighting is going to go on for about 20 hours in rain. I have always thought when I've read about the Battle of Spotsylvania that it was the most vicious fighting that I have ever encountered. Guys were getting bayoneted through earthworks and what they called revetments, where they built logs up on top of each other like a wall.
Oh, yeah.
And guys are bayoneting each other in the pouring rain. At midnight, they're still fighting. It's just some of the most intense fighting I've ever encountered.
Yeah, because if it's pouring rain, it's got to be hard to keep your powder dry.
That was a problem.
So you had to get into that close hand-to-hand, sticking each other type of thing.
Nasty stuff.
Yeah, just mud,
rats. I've read about a lot of battles in the Civil War map, but the one that always stuck with me as being the ugliest, just the most vicious, in the pouring rain, even in the dark, is Spotsylvania. But, I mean, it was critical because, Grant is making a move around the Confederate Army toward Richmond, and we're only maybe not even 50 miles north of Richmond, 40 miles. And you know that if you lose this battle on the Confederate side, that as far as the roads go, you're not going to be able to fight a whole lot of battles other than outside the city of Richmond itself. So you really got to kind of keep the Army away from these road networks, and Spotsylvania was one.
Yeah.
On the 12th, Hancock made his attack. Gordon was in the middle. And once again, Gordon moved right into the breach and halted the attack. But at a critical moment, General Lee rode up, and he, just like he had a few days before at Wilderness, he proposed actually to attack with the men.
Right.
And, they started the chant at Wilderness on Longstreet's line. These are Texans. They've never failed you, General Lee. Lead of the rear. Lead of the rear.
Yeah.
And, of course, he did. And the men made the attack, and they stabilized.
Because they wouldn't go forward until he was somewhere safe.
Right.
Right.
Well, this is the same thing happening again just a few days later at Spotsylvania.
Okay.
Just a few miles down the road. And Lee went to the middle, and Gordon rode up in front of his horse and cut him off and said, General Lee, this is no place for you. These men behind you are Georgians and Virginians. They have never failed you, and they will not fail you here. Will you, boys? And, of course, the men can all hear what he's saying to them, and they're, no, we want to fail him. We want to fail him. So Lee did go to the rear, and Gordon managed to eject the Union forces from the salient within an hour. And because of that, was promoted 2 days later to Major General. Now he's a Major General.
Yeah. Wow.
two years from captain with no military experience whatsoever. The next major thing, Matt, is when Early left the entrenchments at Petersburg around the summer of 64. And he made a diversion up to the Shenandoah Valley to threaten Washington. Mm-hmm. And the 6th Corps was sent away from Petersburg up to Washington to protect it. And we know that on July 9th, about a year after the Battle of Gettysburg, we have the battle down at Frederick called Monocacy. And Gordon was there. He routed Lew Wallace's Federals, fighting essentially unopposed with now in command of the division, disabled about 700 Union troops and captured a similar number. And John Breckinridge was Gordon's corps commander at Monocacy on July 9th, 1864, and he said after the battle to Gordon, if you never made a fight before, this art ought to immortalize you. So that was July 9th of 64. And then the rest of the war, as far as Gordon's going to be concerned, for the most part, other than back at Petersburg, is fighting in the fall in the Shenandoah Valley.
Okay.
He's at Winchester on September 19th when Rhodes is killed. He made a counterattack, flanked an assaulting column with his and Rhodes' division, and inflicted heavy losses into the Union line, although outnumbered, and both of his flanks at one point had been turned. But yet the Confederate line had to give way, the entire Confederate line. And they're retreating back. The fight had been kind of north and west of Winchester. So the Confederates are retreating through the streets of Winchester. And Gordon, as his men are retreating into the streets of town, Gordon actually finds his wife in a broken down carriage in the streets of Winchester. And somehow managed to escape.
Which Battle of Winchester is that you're talking about?
This would be the third Battle of Winchester. The first
okay.
one will be part of the Valley Campaign with Jackson in 62, spring of 62. Second would have been part of the Gettysburg Campaign.
Gettysburg, yeah.
And the third is this fight in September of 64.
Winchester, though, it's an interesting. How many times does that change hands? Something like, is it like 70 or something like that?
I have heard that. It's been a long time.
Yeah. But
I remember when you go to Winchester, there'd be something there, a sign or something that would say that they changed hands.
Yeah.
But some of those are really small.
But right, and it's not battles.
Right.
It's just we leave
vacate,
and you go in,
right.
and yeah. So it's
but
not
those
like
three
there's
battles of Winchester, a whole different ballgame. They're three significant fights.
Sure.
So
there's his wife in the carriage is where you left off.
Right. It's one of the stories about Gordon and Early, and Early was pretty irascible and had quite a temper, and Gordon, he got into it quite a bit. And one of the issues was Early did not like officers to have their wives in the camps.
Okay.
And he kept giving Gordon all this crap about his wife being in camp because Fanny wanted to follow him all the time.
Early, was he a married man?
No. He's a confirmed bachelor, so it has something to do with it.
Yeah.
But he once said, I wish the Yankees would capture Mrs. Gordon and hold her until the war was over.
Oh, jeez.
But after that Winchester fight, Early encountered Mrs. Gordon, and said, Mrs. Gordon, General Gordon is a better soldier when you are close by him than when you are away. And so hereafter, when I issue orders that officers' wives must go to the rear, you may know that you are accepted.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool coming from Early.
From Early.
Yeah.
Exactly. Coming from Early.
Yeah, really.
There was a battle a few days later, about 3 days later, at a place called Fisher's Hill in the Shenandoah Valley, south of Winchester. The Confederates lost about 5,000 casualties in the two engagements at Winchester and Fisher's Hill. And Early ended up retreating up the valley. When you say up the valley, you're going down. You're going south because the Shenandoah River flows north.
Right.
So eventually Early winds up in Waynesboro, which is well down the valley in the fall of 1864. But he got reinforced, and he ends up returning back to Fisher's Hill, where the Union Army is kind of in a static position, if you will, kind of waiting to see how things develop. And Gordon actually climbed up Massanutten Mountain, where there's a ski resort today, very elevated. Was able to look right down at the Union Army position all around Cedar Creek. And figured out exactly where they were, found that the Union Federal left flank was vulnerable to attack, and he led 3 divisions, the 2nd Corps, in routing and driving 2 corps of Sheridan's Union troops from the field. The 6th Corps withdrew but rallied, and Sheridan counterattacked and drove Early from the field. Gordon wanted to attack the Union 6th Corps. Early refused, and the Confederates retreated all the way down to Newmarket in the Shenandoah Valley. By the time we get to December of 64, the 2nd Corps has pretty much left Early in the valley and joined Lee in the Petersburg entrenchments. And even though Gordon never had his promotion acted on in 1865 because of all the chaos that was going on toward the end of the war with the Confederates in the entrenchments at Petersburg, they never actually formally acted on the promotion. But essentially, at this point, Gordon is in charge of the 2nd Corps. He's commanding half.
So are you talking about the promotion to Major General or Lieutenant General?
He'd already been promoted to Major General in May of 14 after Spotsylvania.
Right.
But now it's getting into 1865, and he's essentially serving in the role of a Lieutenant General, even though they didn't formally act on the promotion because of all the nonsense and chaos that was going on in 65 with the Confederate Army. But at that point, according to Douglas Southall Freeman, who wrote Lee's Lieutenants and was Lee's biographer, he said that basically Gordon at that point was Lee's principal confidant in the war. So he's gone.
So where's Longstreet by this point? Where's Longstreet and Hill and?
Well, they're pretty much all in the entrenchments
Ewell.
in Petersburg.
Okay.
The Union Army has crossed the James River, gone completely around Richmond. And since June of 64, they've been circling around the Confederates who are in a siege at Petersburg for 10 months.
Okay. So Gordon's the only one who's footloose and fancy free. He's out and about.
No,
right?
he's with Lee in the entrenchments.
Oh, okay.
And Early has a skeleton force in the Shenandoah Valley.
So now, is there a 4th Corps now in the Army of Northern Virginia?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay.
No, and there's not much left of the 2nd Corps, and there won't be after Lee's lines break at Petersburg.
But Hill hasn't been killed yet.
Hill is about to be. I think Hill was killed around April 1st when the breakthrough, it was April 2nd or April 1st, right after the breakthrough at Five Forks.
Okay, right.
See, Grant had many more troops, and he was able to bring them in up the James River, Shenandoah able to fortify his army at City Point, and then stretch around the Confederate lines, starting to cut supply lines to the south and force Lee to stretch his very thin army out. And finally, on the 31st of March, there was an attack, I believe it was along the Boydton Plank Road southwest of Petersburg, where Pamplin Park Civil War Museum and complex is located today. And then there was a breakthrough on April 1st at Five Forks, which is pretty much the Confederate far right. And when those two successful attacks by the Union Army occurred late March, early April 65, then Lee was forced to withdraw from Petersburg and begin to retreat toward Appomattox.
Okay.
About a week before this, the last major Confederate offensive was in the entrenchments at Petersburg. It was Fort Stedman. There's this ring of Confederate forts around the city. And actually, the Union guys commanded Fort Stedman. It was about 200 yards from the Confederate position. They were pretty close to each other. And Gordon was selected to make an attack. He captured Fort Stedman briefly, including 3 batteries, but then all of a sudden, all these Union guys counterattacked from all these different directions and converged, kind of like Peter's charge, and Gordon was have to withdraw. 500 prisoners were captured, and nearly 1,000 feet of trenches on either side of the fort by Gordon. He was at this point commanding about half of Lee's army. When the breakthrough occurred a week later, and they started heading toward Appomattox, Gordon, once again, just like at Gettysburg, was serving as the rear guard. He held Petersburg until nightfall. He was the last to leave Petersburg. And for 4 days, he served as the rear guard on the way to Appomattox.
So this is is that the last, or is that considered the last
major Confederate offensive by the Army of Northern Virginia? Yeah. Yes. Because on the way to Appomattox, it's all pretty much, running.
It's just over.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So they get to Appomattox and...
Do you have time for a human interest story?
Sure, of course. We love them.
I just happened to see this story. I thought it doesn't really have much to do with Gordon, but it's kind of a neat story. I thought it was kind of funny. It involves Petersburg. And the story is that there was a beautiful Southern girl, and she was on her daily mission of love and mercy. And she asked a badly wounded soldier boy what she could do for him. And he replied, "I'm greatly obliged to you, but it is too late for you to do anything for me. I am so badly shot that I can't live long." Apparently, this is one of the stories that Gordon told later.
Okay.
And so the girl says, "Well, will you not let me pray for you? I hope that I am one of the Lord's daughters, and I would like to ask him to help you." And the soldier looks intently into her bewitching face and replies, "Yes, pray at once, and ask the Lord to let me be his son-in-law."
That's clever.
Kind of a neat story. So, well, as far as the biography of Gordon goes, Matt, it ends at Appomattox. But even at Appomattox, Gordon was kind of aggressive, and he approached west of the town, came through the town toward the Union lines. He actually attacked and carried Union works and 2 pieces of artillery with some cavalry prisoners. This is at Appomattox before the word comes to halt fire and that Lee and Grant are going to meet. And then when the officers did meet and discuss that there was a truce, General Sheridan came up. Now, remember, they had met each other in Shenandoah Valley at Cedar Creek, and Sheridan said, "We have met before." This is what he said to Gordon. "We have met before, I believe, at Winchester and Cedar Creek in the valley. I had the pleasure of receiving some artillery from your government, consigned to me through your commander, General Early." And Gordon looked back and said, "That is true. And I have this morning received from your government artillery consigned to me through General Sheridan." Who he was talking to, which I thought was pretty good. After Lee and Grant met, a lot of people probably don't realize this, can get kind of confusing. They met on April 9th, and they agreed to have a surrender. But the actual surrender ceremony did not occur until the 12th of April. So there's 3 days that intervene. And Lee and Grant appointed commissioners to actually sit down and bang out the surrender agreement, what the terms would be. And Gordon was one of the 3 commissioners appointed by Lee.
So you're talking about the formal surrender of the Army, like when they lay down their arms, and
they had to plan it all out.
Yeah,
they decide what are the terms. Okay, we're going to give Confederates paroles. They'll be able to keep their horses and their sidearms, but they'll surrender, artillery and rifles and things like that, because they'll need the horses and small arms, to protect themselves on their way home, because they're going to disband and go home.
Sure.
And so Lee actually didn't stick around for the ceremony, and neither did Longstreet. They both left. And so...
Where'd they go?
Toward Richmond.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Longstreet went to Richmond, and I know Lee did.
Okay.
Because his home was there.
Because his home, yeah.
So Gordon was left as the presiding commander. And this answers one of the questions that was asked about why was Gordon assigned to be the presiding officer because he's the ranking officer. At this point, the Confederate Army, which is down to about 28,000 men, is just basically two corps. It's the First Corps under Longstreet and the Second Corps that basically Gordon is now. Ewell had been captured a few days before during the retreat to Appomattox at Sailor Creek, April 6th. So he's out of the picture.
So
now,
he's gone.
So Gordon is now commanding half of Lee's army.
So he's like the last man standing as far as high command goes.
Highest ranking. He's the presiding officer. He's given the honor of Lee, if you will, to lead the Confederates in the surrender ceremony.
Okay.
And of course, there's the story of Lee's men. Now, a lot of people don't realize this about Appomattox either, but the entire Union Army did not participate in the actual surrender ceremony.
Right.
Only the 5th Corps did. And guess who's commanding the 5th Corps?
Joshua Chamberlain.
Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, that's right. And so Chamberlain's up, and the Confederates come down a road, and then the Union guys are lined up on either side of him as they leave a road and come up a grass hill into the village. And Chamberlain is there mounted, and Gordon's men are, heads dejected, looking down as they walk in between the Union troops preparing to stack their arms. And all of a sudden, Chamberlain gives an order. And the Union troops lined up on either side of the road, on either side of the Confederates, snapped to attention. I think it was order arms. And Gordon recognized immediately what that was. It was a salute to the valor of their vanquished foe. So he supposedly pulled his sword out and pointed it at his boot, which was answering that.
Salute, yeah.
And if you've ever seen the painting, it's called Honor Answering Honor. And it's Gordon and Chamberlain at that moment. And they said that's the moment, really, where the country started to come back together again.
Right. Very symbolic moment. Am I mistaken? I feel like there's a quote from Gordon at that surrender, maybe to Chamberlain, that's kind of like, we don't want anything to do with you, we may have lost, but we're not friends or something like that. Or am I confusing something here? Do you know what I'm talking about, Eric?
Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's another officer
it's a
in the
different officer.
ANV, and it's not to Chamberlain. It's
to another.
It's like
Yankee
a regimental field officer. Or something like that.
Okay.
You can see, though, how these stories get twisted.
Yeah,
over time.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it, Matt. That's I mean, after that, he got heavily involved in politics.
Right. So yeah, real quick, like after the war until his death, he dies in 1904.
Yeah.
And what does he do with the rest of his life? He goes around giving speeches.
Well, he
gets
goes
into
back.
politics.
He was really concerned about Confederate veterans, and this gets into one of the questions that one of your listeners was asking about was Gordon involved in the Ku Klux Klan?
In the Klan, yeah.
And he actually had to testify about this before, I think, congressional committee in 1871.
That's a Mike Lentz question. Let me just read it to you
Okay.
here. It says, concerning his post-war career, in your opinion, is there enough evidence in his 1871 congressional testimony to suggest that he was a member of the KKK? Did his racial views align with that of the Klan? What role did the Klan or similar paramilitary organizations play in Reconstruction in the South? There's a lot of questions in that one question.
Okay. Well, like I said, Gordon got involved heavily in politics. I think he was a two-term U.S. senator from Georgia and one-time governor, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
There's an equestrian monument of him right in front of the Capitol in downtown Atlanta. I'm surprised nobody's
Still
taken it down. If it has taken down, I haven't heard anything about it.
Okay.
But the last time I was down there, I saw it, and that was about 8 years ago or so. But to answer your question, Gordon answered questions about an organization that he belonged to in Georgia, but he never said it was the KKK. What he said was he was concerned that what was happening is that liberated freed blacks, freedmen as they called them, were given an awful lot of rights, and that some of them were actually inclined to take revenge against Southern veterans who had now lost all power, no longer in the military, and that he was very concerned about his former troops, and that he wanted to see to it that that there was peace between the races and that his men were protected. I think that by today's, the way we look at things today, the way we perceive things, he would certainly be considered a racist. I think he was part of the Klan, along with Nathan Bedford Forrest. But I think it was, in his mind, probably more to protect the rights of some of his former soldiers than it was to aggressively go after black people. I know for a fact that he had a servant that he and his wife saw to that received an education after the war. But so I think he probably was part of an organization that we would know today as the Klan. But I don't think it was the same particular motives necessarily as what we see the Klan become in the early 20th century.
Because from what, I haven't read up on this too much, but when the Klan started, wasn't it more of a like an anti-Republican organization?
Well, you got Reconstruction going on.
Yeah.
You got Union guys who were, handling all the politics. And Gordon was very, very involved in trying to get home rule reestablished in the South. Southerners, Georgians running the Georgian state government. And
right, because wasn't it if you had served in the Confederacy as an officer or something, you weren't allowed to hold office?
Hold office, yeah.
Is that right?
That's probably true.
Or something to that effect?
Well,
Eric?
Yes.
Okay.
You had to have been a commissioned officer in the Confederate Army or an office holder within the Confederate government
to not be able to hold office after.
You couldn't hold office within the federal government during Reconstruction.
During
Reconstruction, right.
I want to say they were also disenfranchised at the same time.
I think that sounds familiar
vote
too.
Anymore.
Yeah.
As a result of that.
Yeah.
And that's what Gordon was heavily involved in. He wanted to see all that put aside. That's a part of bringing the country back together again. Okay, if we're truly going to do that.
Yeah, restore our rights.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So.
But there had to be some punishment. Yeah, like at least while we're rebuilding you. Stay out of it.
But it's just a question of when's it going to end.
Yeah. Well, right. Oh, right. And that's another thing.
And it must have, because he becomes a U.S. Senator for at least 2 terms.
Yeah.
And governor of the state of Georgia.
So he ggets active in politics and gives speeches and does all this stuff. He reunites with the dead Barlow, and then he died. What does he die of?
I remember he was at a home somewhere in Florida, somewhere near like Miami. He had a home, and it might have been something like pneumonia or something that got him. His whole family, everybody knew him, always kind of thought of him as being indestructible, with the 5 wounds at Antietam and everything. And when he did actually die, a lot of people apparently were pretty shocked. They were really surprised.
They thought that he would be the one guy that would live forever?
Yeah, he was 72, I guess, when he died. But when you consider what he'd been through and how, back in those days, people didn't always live as long as they do today, I think that's about average today, isn't it?
Yeah.
72?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, I think it's mid-70s for men in the U.S. now. I think women are like mid-80s.
No, I think they're up to like 120. Yeah. And I think men has gone down to 52. So, yeah, it's the changing times, ladies and gentlemen, changing times. All right, well, let's do this then here, because there were some questions I wasn't able to throw in. Okay. So let's go through those pretty quick there. And folks, for the sake of time, if I don't get to your question, I'm sorry, but what I'll do is I will pop it in the homeless questions pool, and then when we do another one of those shows, we will have it answered there, okay?
Yeah, we're going to have to drain that pool pretty soon, too.
Do we? I haven't added to it, have you?
I thought I saw a few. Anyways, carry on. Don't let me get in the way.
Don't get in the way, Eric. Damn it. All right, let's go here to, let's see, Chaplain Cox starts us off with these here. He says, great subjects for Ask A Gettysburg Guide. The question I have about Gordon is, did he really stop R.E. Lee from leading the counterattack at the Mule Shoe, or is that just another made-up Gordonism? I know it's not a Gettysburg question, but no, that's okay. It's we're taking him for whatever today. At least he didn't bleed out of the bullet hole in his hat at the Mule Shoe. Oh, wait, that was Antietam. Okay, so anyway, we covered that, but go ahead.
I don't think there's any question about it. I was reading Ralph Lowell Eckert's biography on Gordon, and he says there were a number of different accounts of people that witnessed it, and they were all similar and consistent, that they saw this happen.
Okay.
So as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's any doubt that it did occur.
Scott Fastnacht asked a question that is you covered twice, or you covered both of these, I should say. One of them was, can you discuss his role at Antietam and how was he wounded? We went through that. And then also, why was he selected at Appomattox? We also have that to, for the surrender there. Moving on to Brian Derenick. He says, hey, Matt, I got a few questions for your upcoming guest. Thanks. General Gordon, how would your guest, meaning you, Jim, rate generalship compared to how the other Georgia brigades performed at Gettysburg, including those of Wright, Benning, Anderson, and Dole. So Gordon compared to the other Georgia Brigade leaders.
That was a question that I kind of struggled with. I was doing some research yesterday in preparation, and when you look at all those generals that he mentions, Dole, Anderson, Wright, and one other, Benning, they all did well. And in a way, it's kind of like apples and oranges. The biggest thing for me is three of them, Benning, Anderson, and who was the other one?
Right,
are all pretty much involved in the second day. And they have support, pretty much, except for Wright, who got up onto Cemetery Ridge up by the copse of trees and looked over to the left and had no support.
Right.
But he certainly had support on his right because the attack rolled up to his position when he advanced, and he, lacking support, had to retreat. So I think all those generals did well, but Gordon was pretty much on his own. He's the only one, the only brigade in the division, earliest division. I won't say to see any fighting, but when the issue's in doubt at Barlow's Knoll, he's the only one that's really attacking. And he came in on Doles' left. Doles was doing pretty good, but Howard outflanked Doles at Barlow's Knoll. And it was when Gordon came in that the tide turned, that now the Confederates outflanked the Union troops at Barlow's Knoll, and the Union line gave way. And given the numbers that Gordon had and the casualties that he inflicted, and the terrain that he had to go through, crossing Rock Creek, coming up a hill out of the woods, did pretty well in independent command. He had support on his left with North Carolinians and Louisianans, but by that time the Union Army was already in retreat. And the battle starts to go into a different phase. I think for all intents and purposes it was pretty much over for the Union at that point. So I think Gordon was in a little bit different position on day one than some of those other brigades, but they all did well. I mean, they all were Georgians. They all succeeded at to one form. I mean, Benning had plenty of support at Devil's Den. Anderson attacking up toward the Peach Orchard.
Doesn't Benning doesn't he kind of take it upon himself to secure Devil's Den or Houck's Ridge or something after they've pushed the Yankees off? Is there something about that I'm thinking there? Do you know what I'm talking about, Eric? I feel like we went over this on a previous Ask a Guide. But he doesn't have like orders to, but he just kind of takes the initiative and secures the ridge.
Whereas it's the Alabamans that are coming off Big Round Top attacking Little Round Top, and then Texans are coming in on the western side, Little Round Top. So yeah, he does his job at Devil's Den and pretty much holds the ground there, but had support pretty on either side.
It sounds like Gordon was the character.
Well, he's certainly inspired.
Yeah.
I'll say that. When you listen to the accounts by men who were there and saw him, it wasn't just what he said, but it was, like you said, it was how he appeared. His presence, yeah. And the big thing is, going back to the beginning is, he starts as a untrained, no military education, as a captain. And at the end of the war, within about 4 years, he's now commanding half of Lee's army.
Interesting guy. Let's get into some Mike Lentz questions here. He sent in a bunch of them. Let's see. We already talked about that one. Did Gordon ever meet Joshua Chamberlain in the post-war years? And to his knowledge, did they ever correspond about the surrender?
Not to my knowledge at all.
Okay.
That they ever met or corresponded. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm not aware of it.
Do you know?
Oh, I have no idea.
You have no idea? Okay.
You would think if they did, being two men who are very apt to write about their experiences, that we would have heard about it.
Yeah.
I believe Law and Chamberlain corresponded.
They did
to a point after the war. I've never heard of Chamberlain really corresponding with Gordon.
Well, think about it. I mean, they're completely different ends of the battlefield.
Sure. Yeah.
But
they're only. What is their real interaction during the war? It's at Appomattox.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a significant. It's the surrender. Of the army.
I get it. That's a big thing.
End of the war.
Chamberlain's not really. I mean, he talks about that, but he's focusing a lot more of his efforts on
his battlefield heroics.
Correct. Little Round Top specifically, and that's Law.
That's when he saved the country.
He saved America from the dinosaurs. All right.
There you go. Let's see. Okay, we did the Klan question, and then let's see. How accurate is his 1903 memoir, Reminiscences of the Civil War?
I think it's generally accurate, but he embellishes because the whole point of, once again, trying to unify the country, bring it back together again. So he's telling stories that veterans on both sides can appreciate and can relate to. And he's approaching things as we're all American fighting men. So, you know, I think even guides, to some extent, I shouldn't say this, but I think sometimes we're even tempted to some extent to, well, we pride ourselves on being accurate, but we like to tell a good story every now and then.
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I'm saying? So,
Well, because people like to hear a good story.
Right.
So why wouldn't you?
yeah. So, I mean, I think that he's not averse to embellishing, but I think the main points of what he tells in his experiences are generally accurate.
When I hear guides tell stories that are not, you know, set in stone gospel, you know, like these more legendary type stories, they always tell the story and they go, now there's some debate as to whether that's true or not.
Right.
But people like to hear a good story. And that's what history is.
Right.
Story.
Most memoirs you kind of have to take with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Right.
Except for mine. When I write mine,
it's-
everything will be
I'm
very
sure
accurate.
It'll be 100% truthful and accurate. And,
Yes.
but beyond reproach. But especially the later ones, I find.
Yes.
The ones that are, you know, like
When they're old, you mean?
1895 and
Yeah,
later,
yeah.
and there's less people to publicly,
Call your BS.
call you out on it.
Yeah.
They get to be more embellished.
Well,
to
and
a
you're
point.
also old. Like
Right.
old
Sure,
people
I
remember
get that.
things
And I actually
differently.
I had that conversation with Bob months ago, sitting over by the Reynolds Monument, where, you know, I've had experiences that are only 15 years old now, and
Yes.
when they were going on, I had the presence of mind to like write them down in a journal, and I found those journals, 6 months or a year ago. And I started going through them, and I was, wow, I remember this happening completely differently.
Or not at all.
Yeah.
Do you ever have that
or
happen?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember this happening, and I remember this event completely different from what I actually wrote the day it happened.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think we have a tendency to want to blame a lot of these inaccuracies on straight up embellishment. And I don't think that's necessarily the case
No, I don't either.
in a lot of them.
See, that's very wise of
misremembering
you.
things.
It's very wise of you because you're putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, or you're at least looking at the shoes that you're in and you're saying, well, gee, I don't remember this going that way.
You
Most
have
people
to.
don't keep a journal, right?
No.
So how are they going to come to the conclusion you do, because they're not examining themselves this way.
Sure.
But you have, and
you have to
let
do
me
it that
finish
way.
complimenting you.
Oh, okay.
Jesus loves me.
Carry on.
So So you've done it, and now you're able to look at these guys and you're able to say, well, that might be a little unfair to just blanketly say they're embellishing, because I haven't embellished. I completely forgot about this entire episode of my life that's in this journal now. Okay?
It's
Is that
part of the way
uncomfortable?
it's just part of the way your mind processes a traumatic event, or a major event,
or a boring event.
Yeah, it's hard for your mind to make sense of these things, and you want to simplify it as much as possible. So your mind starts to string these memories together in a way that doesn't fit the actual event, but it's easy for you to swallow that pill than it would be otherwise.
Yeah. He's very bad at taking compliments, Jim.
I'm horrible at it.
Well, imagine you're on a speaking tour somewhere in New York State, and somebody brings up Barlow and you're Gordon. How does the story sound if you say, well, one of my officers told me this?
Right.
As opposed to saying, and I came upon Barlow, and it's much more dramatic.
Oh, absolutely.
And especially if that officer that told you the story might have died in the war. And so he's not going to refute you. So it's like, it's my story now, baby. And then you tell the story.
A lot of things, I will say, a lot of things can be ascribed to just being made up or embellished. But like I was saying, a lot of it seems to me it's old guys trying to process a chaotic or traumatic event that happened 40 or 50 years previous to them writing. in a way that makes sense in their mind. And so it doesn't come out quite right.
Right.
And I
with
also
what we know from the historical record.
I also noticed that a lot of people that take people like Gordon or Sam Watkins is another one that I hear people. They never really actually were in war or any situation as chaotic and adrenaline pumping as war can be, and they don't have that knowledge of that experience in their life of what you're talking about, like going through a traumatic event and processing it and remembering it and distilling it and being able to tell it in a proper way. So plus not only that, but like a war. So you get, let's say, Battle of Gettysburg, let's say there's 150,000 men here on both sides combined. You're shooting each other. Your buddies are getting blown up. There's animals screaming all over the place and everything like that. You think some weird shit isn't going down? Like there are some like pretty crazy stories. People act in some pretty crazy ways in those situations. Some of these stories that some people might think are embellishing could very well be true because it's a crazy situation. So why wouldn't there be a crazy story to come out of it?
Sure.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let me get, and along those lines, his last question is, finally, outside of Lew Wallace, are there any other generals in the Civil War who have better creative storytelling talents than John B. Gordon?
Joshua Chamberlain.
Joshua Chamberlain, absolutely. Absolutely.
How about Daniel Edgar Sickles?
Oh, there's another one. There's another one.
Throwing down the gauntlet.
Like Joshua Chamberlain wasn't. Bill Etzkorn wants to know, John B. Gordon was a member of the Mystical Seven while in college. Are there any other Confederate officers or politicians that were members? That was a cappella group, right?
What is the Mystical Seven?
I knew I heard of them somewhere. I was trying to figure out. That one really threw me. I'd never heard of that, Matt. As much as I've looked into Gordon, and I'm not saying it may not be true, but I'd never heard of that before. And certainly there were organizations in schools, and still are today, I think, that exist like that. But I'd never heard of Gordon being involved in anything called the Mystical Sevens.
Well, in fairness, that could have been the beer Bill was drinking when he wrote that question. So,
well, he did belong to a society called
just kidding, Bill.
Demosthenian Society, but I think that was more like a debate society.
Okay.
When he was at the University of Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
But
because that was the thing, they had societies like that, debate societies. Yeah. They weren't all like Cloak and Dagger, Skull and Bones type of secret organizations that. Yeah.
And some of them apparently do. I mean, like the eating clubs at Yale University that George Bush belonged to. There are some secret organizations that exist.
Yeah. I'm part of 3 or 4 of them.
There you go.
Did you find it, Eric? Mystical Seven?
I did.
Okay.
It's Yul
Brynner.
I wasn't sure that was actually a thing. Yeah, they do actually list John Brown Gordon as a member.
Wow.
Apparently, the Temple of the Skull and Bones in Georgia.
Oh, so
it looks like it's a.
Wait, is that part of Skull and Bones Society that like
no,
Bush and Kerry were in?
So. This is part of Wesleyan University.
Okay.
Well, maybe it is. I don't know. This is interesting.
Wesleyan and Buttercup. That is
like a fraternity.
Yeah.
You say it is?
It is a fraternity.
Yeah, it's like a fraternity.
There you go. Okay. I'd never heard that, but good research.
Neither had I.
Somebody did a great job discovering that about him.
Well, that is interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Jim, thank you very much for doing this. This is the first of our biographical Ask A Guides that we did. So you've christened that type of show, that format of show. And we're going to do more of them. Patrons, if you have a person you'd like to learn more about or something, let us know. We'll try to get that going as well. One more thing I forgot to mention in the beginning of the show is the 7 days of Christmas. Not 12, but 7.
Yeah, we're too broke to afford 12 days.
That's right. 7 days of Christmas are going to be 7 episodes from the Patreon feed, released for free on the free feed, so that you get an idea of what you're missing over there. Because, I'll tell you something, those 15-minute previews that we put on Patreon or on the free feed, studies show that it takes about 15 minutes for somebody to warm up when doing one of these things. And so you're really not getting the crux of the show. You're getting our warm-up when we give you those 15-minute previews. Those are always the first 15 minutes of the show. It doesn't get good until after that. And literally, I've been paying attention to this. Sometimes I'm looking and I'm like, wow, somebody dropped the F-bomb at 17 minutes, but not at 15. So there really is something about 15 minutes. I don't know what it is. So we're releasing 7 of those episodes for you. Our patrons, I asked them, what do you think are some of the good episodes from last year? I'm going to release them for free, in the hopes that maybe some people would join us over there, because that's really what keeps all this going, and we can do more of this stuff with more of you helping over there. So anyway, that's going to start on Christmas Day. It's going to go all the way to New Year's Eve. I hope you enjoy that. I hope you appreciate it. Even if you don't join, just listen, share it with people, and enjoy them. And they're going to expire a month out. So they're only going to be available for a month, and then they expire. Yeah, so January 25th through January 31st.
Like your Kohl's Cash.
Exactly. If retail stores can do it, so can we. It's a business, folks. It's a business. Okay. So anyway, Jim Pangburn, thank you very much. Anybody wants to take a tour with Jim or any of the guys that you hear here on Addressing Gettysburg right now, you can send an email to Matt or Eric at addressinggettysburg.com, and we'll get you in touch with them. In fact, you know what? Send it to Eric. Eric at addressinggettysburg.com.
Yep, send them on in.
And we'll get you in touch with the guides, and you can set something up. And then remember, after the new year, you'll be able to just go on to addressinggettysburg.com and book them. Well, I mean, not book them anytime you want. You don't, it's whenever they're available, but you'll be able to book them. Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Always fun to be with you.
It is always fun to have you on as well. Thank you all for listening. Veronica, hello over there. Veronica's in the peanut gallery again. Just yell out hello. Okay, there you go. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good one. All right. We made it, folks. We made it. I like that. I like doing a bio.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and hail a reckoning on the nail, no man forgets shall go to jail from